We will now move on to our main topic, Syria and the situation in West Kurdistan, which we will discuss with our guest. We want to understand what Trump's policy will be for Syria and West Kurdistan. There have been several rumors that Donald Trump has decided to withdraw US troops from Syria and West Kurdistan, especially from areas threatened by ISIS. Joining us live from New York is Irina Zuckerman, board member of the Washington Outsider. Miss Irina, thank you for being with us. Many eyes were on Trump regarding the withdrawal of US forces from northeastern Syria. What will Trump's position be? Trump himself stated, "I'll make a decision on that." However, he also said, "We are not interfering in the situation in Syria." Syria itself has many problems. How do you interpret Donald Trump's remarks?
Thank you so much for the question. Regarding potential US withdrawal of troops that was being reported by some media, Donald Trump stated that he has not yet made a decision, but he will. So we can expect a clear answer on that in the coming days or weeks. For now, however, while the troops are still there, they will continue their operations as normal. They're building a base, they're safeguarding oil, and they're continuing cooperation on counterterrorism activities, specifically focused on countering ISIS elements with their partners SDF. But they will not be taking active part regarding the general political climate in Syria, or in any way becoming more active, or interfering with the current processes, unless there is an escalation that threatens the security of US interests. For now, that seems to be unlikely, because the interim government appears to be focused on its self-establishment, its legitimacy, and on building relationships with the international community.
Yes, ma'am. The threat of ISIS has not officially disappeared. The group continues to pose a major threat to the region and global security, particularly to US interests in the Middle East. Given these risks, do you believe Trump will still decide to withdraw troops from the region?
I think there's a very high likelihood of ISIS becoming reactivated due to instability, due to the fact that the interim government does not have control over all the factions that are involved in fighting around Syria, and due to the border security situation, we have seen Iraqi militias attempting to enter, and we also have seen the potential for extremist groups looking towards the border to exploit the current apparent vacuum of power. Trump has shown early decisiveness regarding ISIS by attacking an ISIS stronghold in Somalia today. There's no reason to believe that if the US troops or other interests come under attack from ISIS, or if ISIS simply grows sufficiently present in Syria, that he would not do the same. Of course, it will be much easier to do that if US troops are also on the ground. On the other hand, he has previously conducted airstrikes that did not involve ground operations, so that's a possibility. I hope that he will understand that having US troops on the ground is a very significant deterrence against terrorist organizations, and will make the decision to at least keep sufficient contingency to avoid that could prevent ISIS from spreading and destabilizing the country, and forcing US to then have to come back and conduct airstrikes.
Yes, ma'am. In recent years, Joe Biden's policies have largely prevented Turkey from intervening militarily in Syria, especially in Kurdish areas. Do you think Trump will continue this policy, or will he pursue a new approach?
Donald Trump clearly stated that Syria is not a priority. He essentially described Turkey's growing role in Syria as something that is basically he's taking for granted. And it doesn't sound like he's planning to engage or create any red lines for Turkey regarding this issue. His concern for now seems to keep the status quo with the US troops until he makes the decision on whether or not to withdraw them. If he does withdraw the troops, I think he will interfere far even less in the political dynamics in the region, even if they include additional attacks by Turkey on the SDF. However, if the US troops remain, that could include discussions with Turkey regarding preventing harm to U.S. interests, including its partnership with the SDF. However, none of that will be resolved until the decision is clearly made on what course the U.S. will be taking overall in the region. Human rights violations are not on the top of Donald Trump's agenda, but safeguarding U.S. interests and um, preventing waste in the way operations are being conducted are, and that is the prism through which his entire foreign policy is going to be conducted from now on. Of course, if Turkey's operations endanger U.S. interests, lead to any sort of regional escalation, including potentially with Israel on the borders, or in any way invite terrorism broadly into the country, I think that will be a completely different conversation at that point.
Yes, Miss Irina, you mentioned human rights and the United States has engaged with Turkey on this issue. However, Turkey and Turkish-backed armed groups continue to carry out attacks in northern Syria, with civilian casualties occurring daily, including women and children. Why have US efforts been ineffective in stopping Turkey's attacks?
Donald Trump will not be interfering in any action by Turkey unless it directly threatens U.S. troops or otherwise immediately affects operations U.S. involved in. He has made it clear that human rights are not priority, whether in Syria or in other countries. That doesn't unless they involve U.S. citizens or residents in some way. Um, I think he is not prioritizing confronting Turkey over those issues at the moment, and it sounds to me like we might see a rapprochement between Erdogan's government and the Trump administration, judging by some internal domestic indications. Um, I think Trump is looking to have as little involvement in Syria as possible, and he believes that Turkey and Israel can decide the issues internally among themselves, along with local Arab states. And he just does not want to commit U.S. troops or any sort of financial expenditures. And he also does not want to spend political capital on resolving issues he feels do not directly concern the United States. Of course, many people look at it very differently, and arguably, considering that human rights violations ultimately affect policy, security, and partnerships um, that are needed for the US to be successful around the world. That is a very short term line of thought. But on the other hand, Donald Trump only has one term left, so he's not necessarily thinking long term and past his own interests and priorities that he wants to accomplish.
Yes, ma'am. A few days ago, Ahmed al Shara was appointed interim president by the government. Do you think the United States support Shara remaining in power long term?
To be honest, that is a very open question. Uh, it's not clear whether Shara will be able to consolidate his power sufficiently to remain in place. For instance, there are already groups questioning his rhetoric on pluralism and decentralization. There are challenges and discipline challenges from other armed groups and factions around the country, which were part of the anti-Assad coalition, but have then went separate ways from HTS. There are voices against HTS that are questioning his leadership, and there are certainly voices in the West as well who are skeptical about his long-term commitments. And finally, of course, there's Turkey, which is concerned about Shara's direction and whether it will fully align with Turkish interests in Syria, including preventing um, the growth of autonomy for the Kurds and including potentially blocking Turkey's pathway towards playing a greater and more dominant role inside the country. If any of these factors end up motivating any of the anti-Shara voices sufficiently, he will either be forced out of power or potentially killed. We may see a completely different rearrangement of actors striving to take his position in the near future. The field right now is very unpredictable. Shara does not have a record of governing a country, which is also being challenged by um, by many years of warfare, corruption, mismanagement, and sectarianism. So a lot remains to be seen in the coming years.
Yes, at Wednesday's meeting, when Ahmed al-Shara was elected interim president, key groups were absent. The Druze, Kurds, and Alawites were not represented, nor were many other significant communities. Only Shara's close allies and friendly groups attended. Do you see this as a dangerous sign for the future of Syria?
There are legitimate concerns about it indeed, because Shara's rhetoric about pluralism does not necessarily align with what we're seeing on the ground. The Alawites are resisting SNA action and there are clashes going on, and they seem to be rejecting the legitimacy of the interim government altogether. The Kurds so far have been open to negotiations, but they are also facing security issues as well, and it's not clear what terms would be ultimately agreeable between Shara's government and the Kurds. He has been making a lot of noise that seems to be taken very positively by Western media, but he is very short on specifics. And the fact that he self-appointed himself as president without any input from the other groups around the country is very questionable and raises questions about his commitment to his own comments. Is he really interested in having an inclusive and pluralistic government, or is he merely going to be somewhat tolerant of different groups as long as they don't challenge his authority, but without necessarily involving them in important political processes? That remains to be seen, but right now the optics are not particularly great, and the Western media is not challenging and not bringing up these questions. They seem to be taking his comments and promises at face value.
Irina Zuckerman, board member of Washington Outsider, you joined us live from New York. Thank you for your analysis.
Thank you so much.